Hello world, welcome back to the Razor RC, and today we're doing the full review of the Team Associated Rival MT8. It is a brand new electric four-wheel drive, 1/8 scale, 6S capable monster trim from Team Associated, which is a, obviously more of a well-known racing brand, but they do have a few bashers, a few RTRs, and this is an update, or I guess kind of the big brother to the MT10, which is their smaller 10 scale electric four-wheel drive monster truck. It's also the cousin, I would say, to the Redcat Kaiju. Very similar monster truck. Even shares a lot of the same parts, but as we'll see, it is a different vehicle, and almost like a version 2.0 of the Redcat Kaiju, or almost like a Team Associated tuned version of the Redcat Kaiju. So yeah, we're going to be talking about this. Retails for $510 here in the United States, or if you get the LiPo and sort of basic charger version, I think it's like $570 or $580, a little bit more, but I did pick up the 510 ready to run without the battery. So yeah, we're going to be doing this review in a bunch of different categories, 7 different categories. Those are going to be the electronics. We're going to be talking about the build, how that went, how it came from the factory, the design, which is basically the layout, the design of the vehicles, what they kind of incorporated into how it's put together, the performance, of course, how it drives, how fast is it, how good is it in the air and acceleration and braking. We're also going to be talking about the durability, of course, which I think is self-explanatory. And we're also going to be talking about support and maintenance, which is kind of the livability of this vehicle, how easy is it to get parts, how is it easy to work on, how's the warranty, that kind of thing. And finally, the value. So $510, how does that compare to other vehicles in its class? So all these ratings are going to be as compared to the other vehicles out there that are in the 1/8 scale 6S class. And I have the fortune to actually own like pretty much every single one of them. I've got the Traxxas eRevo 2.0 and the brand new Traxxas Sledge. I've got the Arrma Kraton EXP and Outcast EXP. I also had the Notorious V5. I've even got like the HPI Savage X Flux V2. I've got the Redcat Kaiju. I've got the Team Corally Kronos XTR, the Dementor V2, the Punisher. So yes, I do actually have like every single A-scale 6S vehicle out there from all the major manufacturers, and so I'm very confident and sort of knowledgeable, I guess, about how this rates to those. So the ratings are going to be on a scale from 1 to 5 stars. 3 stars would be average, meaning it's kind of average within all those other vehicles. 5 stars would be best in class, and then 1 star would obviously be worst in class. So yeah, let's kick off the review. So the first category is the electronics, and we'll start off with the radio. This is the Team Associated XP120. Comes in all their RTR vehicles, and I've had many of these. I've had, I don't know, 3 or 4 of these by now, and very familiar with this radio. Has kind of all the basics, the steering and throttle reversing, the throttle and steering dual rate and trim, on-off button, 2.4 gigahertz, and then takes 4 AA's, just like pretty much every other radio on the market. Foam wheel, which is, pretty nice to have that. Not all vehicles actually have that. Not all radios have that. Trigger feels a little on the light side, but it's decent. But I'm not a fan of this radio. It has all the functionality that you'll need, and so it's pretty typical for all the adjustments and stuff. That's fine. But really what I find is that the throttle linearity is pretty lacking. It's sort of got like this half pull, which it kind of doesn't do a whole lot, and then all of a sudden it goes into like full throttle. It's not something totally obvious until you use other radios, but it is something if you sort of test it out, try it out, and think about it, I think you'll also notice as well. The other thing is quite a bit of lag in this radio, and it does contribute, especially on the 6S scale, A-scale 6S capable monster truck. It does make it harder to control, a lot harder than it needs to be, in my opinion. So yeah, the radio I think is actually somewhat on the poor side. Pulling off body, we'll look at the electronics in the vehicle. We got a 25 kilogram middle gear servo, pretty good servo, actually one of the better ones I think out there. Not super fast or anything, but it is competent. Did not break on me. It is middle geared, decent enough torque, actually quite a bit of torque, and speed isn't, kind of meh, but decent servo overall. On the motor and ESC side, we've got basically what's a rebranded quick run, I think it's the 8BL150. Reedy calls it the SC1500. 6 or 8 or something like that. So it is a 6S capable programmable ESC, so that's pretty nice. Has an integrated fan. Obviously has kind of these basic, I don't know, what are these 3.5 millimeter or 4.5 millimeter connectors here, and it has made it to a I think it's like a 36 by 68 or 36 by 70 motor. So this electronics combination, it's not particularly awesome. It is a little on the undersized size, a little bit on the smaller size for a A-scale 6S vehicle, but it is quite fast in this vehicle. This thing is has a ton of acceleration. On 4S, it almost feels like a lot of vehicles on 6S, and on 6S, it's pretty much like an animal. Somewhat difficult to control, even I would say, with this radio, but tons of power, tons of acceleration. I don't think anyone will feel like this vehicle is slow. It's actually one of the fastest ones out there. Top speed, I think, are somewhere in like the mid 50s, but the acceleration is brutal. You get instantaneous backflips. You can definitely triple backflip this thing in there, probably even quadruple backflip it on a large enough ramp. So this thing is powerful. Servo, I think, is pretty good. You know, definitely above average. It's a decent one out there. There's other servos, I think, that come on a lot of vehicles that are either weak or even slower or break easily or have like weird tooth counts or whatever. This one is a solid servo. No concerns there. But the radio, like I mentioned, is below average. I think it's actually one of the poorest for an A-scale 6S vehicle. So in the electronics side, I'm actually going to give it an average score. I'm going to give it 3 stars. Motor and ESC, there are definitely better ESCs out there that are based more on the Hobbywing Max 8 ESC, which is kind of a higher spec ESC. This is kind of the budget 6S capable ESC from Hobbywing. And the motor is a little bit on the small side. Definitely runs hot on 6S, so something you want to monitor if you're running this thing on 6S. So wish they had a little bit bigger motor, but there's definitely a lot of power in this thing. The servo is pretty good. So overall, electronics wise, you know, there's some parts that I think are pretty good. I think the servo is pretty good. I think the radio is pretty bad. I think the motor and ESC are kind of average. So overall, 3 stars I think is a fair score. Build-wise, the Kaiju did have some issues, the primary one being that all the discs were pretty much empty. Shocks were totally fine, full of shock fluid. I think it's 50 weight all the way around, no issues there. But the discs, front, center, and rear only had like a few drops of oil in them. They pretty much looked like they were like 10% full. I definitely highly recommend you change or add oils, really. I'm running 100K in the middle. I'm running 20K up front and 12K in the rear, which is fine. You could go 15, you know, 150 or 15. You could even go down to like, you know, 80,000 weight oil in the middle. I think anywhere in that 80,000, 100,000 weight would be totally fine. And then in the front and rear, somewhere between like 10 and 20K front and rear. You usually go a little bit higher in the front, but those are the shock fluids I would recommend. I think the manual says something like 30K front and rear or 50K front and rear, something fairly high, but yeah, somewhere in that 10 to 20K, I think it's totally fine. We'll give you actually a little more steering than those thicker fluids. This is a little bit of a smaller vehicle. You don't need to go crazy with the diff fluids. I think a little bit lighter weight allows it to be a little more maneuverable, which is kind of one of the strengths of this smaller scale vehicle. But in the build department, because the diffs are pretty much empty, you do need to go through them. Also, I think a couple of the screws were mismatched. They weren't quite the right screw sizes, so I did have to fix that. Not a major issue, but yeah, in the build category, I do think it is below average. I'm going to give it 2 stars. Most vehicles out of the box, you may have to adjust a few things, but having discs that were basically empty, I think is a no-no. And so yeah, in the build category, we're going to give it 2 stars. Alright, like I mentioned, this is very similar to a Redcat Kaiju. So if you have a Redcat Kaiju, if you've seen one before, very similar. Actually, even the turnbuckles, the steering knuckles, the hubs are all pretty much the same. The wheelie bar, I think, is the exact same part. I think the diff cases are even the same. Probably the drive shafts as well. I think it's dog bones in the rear and CVAs up front. But they did actually redesign quite a few parts. They actually, I think, try to fix the biggest issues on the Redcat Kaiju, and I think for the most part they succeed. So on the Redcat Kaiju, the diff cups tend to break. I don't know, they crack or split or kind of splay out. I'm not 100% sure why that is. I think it's actually due to a ton of flex in the arms and allows the arms to basically overextend, hyperextend, allow the drive shafts to come out at a weird angle and actually hit the diff cups and cause them to break. But I did not experience that with this vehicle at all, so that seems to have been fixed. Other major issue on the Kaiju, the front bumper is really, really weak. Probably one of the weakest front bumpers on any vehicle I've ever owned. So they did redesign the front end. That is nice. Took some direct impacts to the bumper. No issues there. Super solid. So that seems to be fixed. They also redesigned the body mount, so brand new shock towers, Brand new body mounts, quite a bit nicer. They do have screws to hold them in place. They are adjustable up and down instead of using body clips. And then the main one, the chassis is completely redesigned. Rather than a plastic high center of gravity chassis, it's got a nice aluminum low center of gravity chassis. They did change out the tires. I think these tires are actually pretty good. They don't look particularly awesome. The Redcat Kaiju had more of a purely dirt bias type of tire, but this one I think works in a variety of terrains actually pretty well. On the street and grass maybe not the best, but on any sort of dirt surface I think it's also excellent, so that is great. Other changes, sliding motor mount rather than kind of this turning style motor mount. That is a huge improvement. Just 2 screws to loosen it, allow it to slide back and forth. It is geared a little bit on the high side, and I think that contributes to why it runs so hot, but yeah, it is nice to have kind of a more fixed motor mount that is a little more solid. The old one, the motor mount plate could actually bend. I bent mine, and so yeah, I think that's an improvement. They also added tower to tower braces, or tower to center diff to tower braces, so that's really nice. Aluminum pieces, had no issues there. I even nose planted this thing from probably a 15-20 foot high jump straight in the ground, no issues there. Battery tray is also improved. The old one kind of had these little, I don't know, U-shaped holders in place. This one's a lot more solid. A little bit of adjustment. You can't put like super huge batteries in this thing, but it is nice that the battery with battery straps is pretty good. No issues there with any of my batteries. And then they've got the same receiver box I think as before. It's got a little body clip to open and close that. There's no foam or anything like that, so it's not exactly waterproof, but splash proof, I think it's totally fine. Now, things that did not change, the upper turnbuckles seem to be the same issues. So the Redcat Kaiju did tend to break upper turnbuckles. I broke one on this. I think they still have some quality control issues. I actually updated my rear ones to the Techno pieces, so I do have a video on that. They do hold up quite a bit. They're a lot more durable in my opinion than the stock sort of chrome plated ones. I've never actually broken one on the front or the steering turnbuckles, but the rears I've broken several between the Kaiju and this one, so I do think it's worth updating that. They did update the upper rods, so that is a change. They look a little bit different, and that was also an issue on the Redcat Kaiju, so it's nice to see they've addressed that. Shocks, so shocks look exactly the same as the Redcat Kaiju. And I think there's a little bit of design problem, which is that the pistons have 4 by, I think it's 1.2 millimeter holes. Not enough or too much pack actually. It doesn't allow the fluid to flow through very well. I did break a piston on this. I did break a piston on my Redcat Kaiju as well. I do recommend adding 2 additional holes to all the shocks in the rear at least. That will alleviate that problem. They still have E-clips in the rear, which is probably the only design thing I don't like. But shock-wise, the quality is quite nice. But yeah, that is a tuning thing that I think is well worth doing. Now the arms have been completely redesigned, all new parts. I think they're fully compatible with the Redcat Kaiju, but they are a little bit different style. So they are interchangeable between the Kaiju and the MT8. They are very, very stiff. The Kaiju's got pretty flexible arms all the way around. These are quite stiff, almost too stiff in my opinion, and we'll talk about the durability more on that. But yeah, new design there, hubs, hexes, wheel nuts, everything else is the same. Design wise, I think it's pretty good. 4mm aluminum chassis, it's not 70-75 or anything like that, but all steel drivetrain all the way around. Nice motor mount, upper tower to tower braces. Shock towers are quite nice, body mounts are quite nice. Bumper works really well. Does have nice all aluminum hexes. Serrated aluminum wheel nuts, wheelie bar, which seems pretty durable as well, bumper super durable. So overall in the design category, I think this is a pretty good design. It even has options for sway bars. You can get aluminum steering knuckles and stuff. So yeah, this is a pretty good design. Adjustable servo saver, which is nice. Overall, no real concerns about the design, just the shocks to be retuned a little bit. So I'm going to give it 4 stars in the design category. Easy to work on, a lot of adjustments, a lot of tunability, improvements again over the Kaiju, which I think make it better. So overall, design wise, 4 stars. I think it's one of its stronger points. My favorite category, probably performance. How does this vehicle actually drive? And I'm just talking about how fast is it. Like I mentioned, it is crazy fast. I think most people will be satisfied with 4S. They won't feel it slow. On 6S, it is very, very fast, and even somewhat difficult to drive, I think, for a lot of people, especially with the stock radio. So power-wise, no concerns there. It is one of the better vehicles out there, speed-wise, acceleration-wise. It is pretty brutal. Now, how it actually drives, I was a little surprised because the Redcat Kaiju I'm very familiar with. It's not a bad vehicle. I wouldn't say it's one of the best handling vehicles. It is a short wheelbase vehicle, so wheelbase wise, I think it's similar to the Kaiju, which is about 320 millimeters or so, about 12.5 inches, I think, sort of hex to hex. So wheelbase wise, it's about the same size as an A-scale buggy. It is obviously wider than an A-scale buggy, but a little bit on the smaller side for an A-scale vehicle. Now, it does have a low center of gravity chassis, aluminum, so this is definitely much more like almost like a race vehicle or almost like a truggy style compared to the Kaiju, but it's definitely not a truggy. I mean, obviously body wise there's no wing. It is not a truggy. It's not the right scale or size or anything like that, but it drives a little bit more like that because it does have that low center of gravity. The aluminum chassis is quite thick, quite heavy. It's all the way at the bottom, so it's a lot more stable, I think, than the Kaiju. Handles better, more planted. The other thing I want to say is that the steering is quite a bit better than the Kaiju in my opinion. I think it's something to do with the arms. There's like no flex in the arms. The chassis extremely stiff. The vehicle is a little bit heavier, a little more planted. Driving it is much more direct in my opinion on the ground. So handling wise, I think it is actually pretty good. This is one of the more fun vehicles to drive on the ground. I think it actually handles quite well. If I had to race like a vehicle like this sort of size and scale, I would probably pick this. Nice. Team Associated knows what they're doing with regards to racing. I don't know how much input they actually had in this vehicle, with the original manufacturer. Obviously they kind of took a Redcat Kaiju design and then kind of redesigned it to what I would consider Team Associated specs, and I think they did a great job. It drives really, really well. Shock tuning wise is actually pretty good. It's pretty firm. Shock springs, no issues there. I think the damping is pretty good, except like I mentioned, too much pack, so it does tend to blow through the pistons and break them. But when you're doing huge jumps, but on the ground, it handles really well. In the air, just flips like crazy. Like I mentioned, triple, even quadruple backflips are possible. Stock gearing, stock power, stock everything. I think you do triple backflips for sure. I got videos showing that several times. And so yeah, overall performance wise, I think is actually its strongest point. I'm going to give it 5 stars. I think it handles awesome, tons of power, really good in the air. It's actually quite neutral in the air. There's a lot of adjustability you can do with the ESC. You can adjust the brakes, the drag brake, the punch levels, all that kind of stuff. So this thing handles well, and then there are even option parts to like add sway bars. Obviously you can change the tires. So this has a lot of tuning adjustments. I think it's really, really good performance wise. I'm going to give it full 5 stars. One of the best out there for sure in the A-Scale 6S lineup. So I crashed the Team Associated Rival MT8 a fair amount. I did some massive nose plants. I landed on the tail a bunch of times. Obviously launched it huge in the air, but I did break a fair amount of things on this vehicle. First off, the rear arms. I don't know what it is, but I've broken 3 rear arms. The stock plastics, like I mentioned, are very stiff. There's not a whole lot of give in them. I think that helps maintain the durability of the outdrives, things not breaking so much on the rear end, but the arms did break. Also bent a hinge pin. Like I mentioned, I also broke a shock piston inside here. And I did bend a couple of the rear shock shafts. I haven't checked the front. They look okay. They're not leaking or anything, but they were slightly bent on the rear just from doing those huge jumps. I do think you need to adjust the pack on those pistons because it pretty much just kind of slams in the ground and just bounces off rather than kind of absorbing that energy and kind of cushioning the blow. It just kind of goes bam. And so all those stresses get applied to the arms, the shocks, the turnbuckles, everything, even the tires. So that is a bit of a concern. Also broke the rear bumper here on the back. This little plastic piece here. It is, again, fairly stiff. Stiffness is not always the best thing. You want a little bit of flexibility in certain parts, especially bumpers, which are meant to absorb impacts rather than just kind of smash into things and not flex or not bend at all. So that's another area I broke. And like I mentioned, I did break a rear turnbuckle as well. I do highly recommend picking up the Techno parts. I'll throw down a part number in the description below. But that is another area that they really didn't fix with the Redcat Kaiju. And again, I think that problem is here on the MT8. I also broke a front spindle and C-hub, basically landing it from like 20 5 feet high or so, kind of on the corner like this. I actually landed the vehicle doing like a double front flip, double forward front flip, kind of landed it at an angle, and that did break these two pieces, so I had to repair those. You know, if you're doing huge jumps and stuff like that, this thing I think is kind of limited to that 10 to 15 foot range. Once you start going 20 feet plus high in the air, doing triple backflips, I think things are going to start breaking, and definitely you'll have to look into how to make this thing more durable. It's not so much designed for that, in my opinion. This is more of a low altitude thing. Like if I were racing this on a track, I think this would probably be the best choice out of all the A scales out there, especially on this size. Now, if you're racing truggies, maybe you want something a little bigger, but for this size vehicle, it handles well. It's designed, in my opinion, and performs better, keeping it under 10 feet high and maybe single backflips. So yeah, it's kind of a long way to explain the durability, but I do think that's important. I'm giving it 2 stars, a little bit below average in my opinion. In the US, Team Associated is one of the larger brands. Obviously, most hobby shops will carry Team Associated parts. I've got a ton of Team Associated vehicles, from their 10 scale stuff, their race vehicles, their stadium trucks, their short course. I've had a ton of Team Associated stuff, and it's definitely pretty popular in the US. I don't know how it is in the rest of the world, but for sure in the US, Team Associated is a pretty big brand. It's nice that the parts are pretty widely available. I had no issues getting any of the parts. Actually, they're even easier to get than the Redcat parts, with which it shares quite a bit of commonality with the Redcat Kaiju. So I think in the support and maintenance side, I think it's definitely above average, 4 stars. Not best in class, but really, really good. And it's nice that not only can you buy Team Associated parts, you could buy Redcat Kaiju parts for a lot of this stuff as well. So no concerns there. The maintenance on this thing is also really good. Easy to work on, easy to get to the diffs, easy to get to the electronics. The motor mesh, easy to set. Servos, easily accessible with 4 screws. Even the receiver box, super easy to get to. No screwdriver or anything needed for that. So this is a really, really nice vehicle. Support and main side, definitely above average, 4 stars. One of the stronger points, again, of the Redcat, the Rival MT8. So yeah, I'm going to give it above average score of 4 stars. The Rival MT8 are for $510 or $509.99 here in the US. I think that's a pretty good value. Most A-scale 6S vehicles are at least $500. Some even go up to like $800, like the Traxxas Sledge is like $300 more than this thing. I mean, that's pretty ridiculous. It's like 60% more than this. You could buy like 3 of these for 2 of the Sledges. It's kind of crazy that way. So I think it's a pretty good value. The Kaiju is still cheaper at $450. Some of the Team Corally stuff, it's close in price and probably higher quality parts, better electronics. So value-wise, I don't think it's best in class, but I think it is above average, 4 stars. One of the cheaper vehicles out there. I think pretty high-quality vehicle overall. All aluminum chassis, aluminum upper braces, decent electronics. The shocks are nice, aluminum, fairly thick. I think they're 16mm shocks. So all steel drivetrain, adjustable turnbuckle. So a lot of value in the box, and that low price gives it a 4-star rating in my view. Again, one of the stronger points, and certainly if you're looking for a little more value on the value side, this is a pretty good choice. So 4 stars. So my final thoughts on the Rival MT8 from Team Associated. Pretty interesting vehicle. I wasn't sure what to make of this when I got it. Would it just be basically a Redcat Kaiju? Would it have all the same issues that the Kaijus have? Is it better? Does it handle the same? How's the power? All that stuff. So I was actually pleasantly surprised to find that this thing actually drives really, really well. I do enjoy driving this vehicle. I think even the tires work really well on like pretty much all dirt surfaces. I only drive my off-road vehicles on dirt. I don't drive them on the street or anything like that. So I'm not as familiar with that. But yeah, high performing vehicle, one of the best out there in my opinion. Power is pretty much insane. I do think it's well worth getting a better radio. If you've already got another radio out there, throw in a receiver that's compatible, and I think you'll find this way easier to drive. Out of the box on 6S, it is hard with this radio, but with a good radio, you can throw a bunch up to 9. You'll get the responsiveness you need. You'll get the linearity you'll need. And then you'll actually find this thing actually drives not totally out of control. It's got a ton of power, but it's controllable power. It's got very, very good handling. So that's really the strong points of this. I do like that this is backed by Team Associated. That is a bigger brand than, for example, Redcat. Easier to get parts, easier to talk to somebody, in my opinion. More shops are going to carry parts. More stores, even online, are going to carry parts. So anyways, let me know what your thoughts are on the Rival MT8 if you have one, and what your experiences are if you're thinking about getting one. How this compares to other vehicles. I have everything else, and I have reviews on pretty much everything else out there. So you can look at those scores as well if you're considering picking out this or any of the other vehicle. I will have links in the description below if you want to pick up one of these. It does help out the channel a little bit. So if you like content like that, it's a good way to support it. So anyways, hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit the like, share, subscribe, add notifications buttons. Look for more videos soon. Thanks for watching.